I'm happy to introduce to you. I know we're small in numbers right here, but this is going to be a great lecture for you. Dr. Tobin Watkinson and I have been friends for a long time, over 15 years. In fact, that mustache was brown when I first met him.
And he had hair.
And I had hair. But he has a great background. He's been in practice for many years, and has been 17 of those years was spent at Scripps Research Facility in near San Diego. He's in fact where I first became involved with him, and he'll tell you about that as part of his lecture. But very fascinating life. He's, if you will, Mr. House of Scripps. When nobody else can figure out the problems, they send them to him. And a lot of you are like that. And I think as you listen to him, you're going to find his message today, especially about these powerful minerals, very informative and very helpful for your own individual practices. So I'll now turn the time over to Dr. Toby Watkinson.
Thank you very much, John. You know, my background, my father was a chiropractor, and my brother's a chiropractor. And in growing up in a chiropractic family, it was nutrition, it was all sorts of alternatives. And today when people come to me and they say, well, what would you suggest I do? Should I become a chiropractor? Should I? I said, well, you know, chiropractic used to really practice major areas of naturopathic medicine. I said, my suggestion is become a naturopath, because you've got the whole world there, instead of now being what's happened in chiropractic is you've gotten pigeonholed, so to speak, in terms of being a person that treats low back and neck problems. But I commend you for all being forward thinking enough to become a naturopath a long time ago, probably many of you. What I'm going to talk to you about today is body electric. I was originally asked to speak on minerals, and that's what I was prepared to speak on, but then I read the material and I was speaking on body electric, which is really great because I wanted to develop a really nice PowerPoint on body electric issues. So what I wanted to do here was tell you about a story that in my life, and that was about 14 or 15 years ago. I was bitten 7 times across my lower back by a brown recluse spider, and they produce a sphingomyelinase, and this basically just eats up the myelin on your nerve, and before you know it, you don't function. And I was experiencing some very significant paralysis. They took me to Scripps, they did MRIs, they did bone scans, they did this, that, and the rest. But because I'd had a previous bite a number of years earlier, I didn't have all the skin deterioration that is normally found with a brown recluse spider bite. But what I did have, and that's what I'm showing you here, is I couldn't stand up. I was on the floor. I had no bowel control. I had no urinary control. My body wasn't functioning. I kept on saying to myself that this is going to be an interesting ride. I'm going to learn something that nobody else knows. And this is a quote from the fellow who got the Nobel Prize for finding ascorbic acid, vitamin C. And Georgi had this to say. He said, most human suffering at present is caused by so-called degenerative disease. The name standing for disease we don't understand and consequently can do nothing about. Now, that's really a large part of my practice, and is probably a large part of your practice. He went on to say something, and I added the process or event in terms of illness. And my thinking in that is that the process of illness is very rarely treated. The event of illness is most of the time the major treatment that people receive. Get rid of the pain, get the swelling reduced, so forth, so on. You're doing fine, you can go home. The process of the illness is that's underlying it. What is happening there that is not obvious to us, that's causing what this patient is suffering from. So the evidence of such disease also points towards some major gap in our basic understanding. So back in the 50s, he wrote something called bioenergetics. This is a Nobel Prize winner, researcher, and he was at Cape Cod doing research on mussels and marine biology, and he was at the mussel lab when he wrote this. Possibly all these gaps may have one common denominator, some process which eludes detection. In other words, he's in the middle of science, he's in the middle of technology, he's in the middle of medicine, and he's saying, we don't have the understanding. He goes on to say that some fundamental fact, if not a whole dimension, is missing from our biological thinking. Medicine typically practices in what's called reductionism. They get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller down to the cell to see what's going on with it. And the whole basic biophysics of it is really missing the point. So here I am lying on the floor. You know, I can't control my urine, I can't control my bowel. I'm in severe pain, and nobody knows what's wrong with me. The doctors at Scripps took my wife down the hall for one of those, you know, your husband's dying, but we're not really sure why, because we can't prove any of his disease. So I said, I guess this is up to me. And this particular quote I find exactly what I did. And research is to see what everybody else has seen and think what nobody else has thought. And what I was thinking at the time is something is wrong with me because I have no energy between my mid-thigh and the bottom of my rib cage. That part of me does not work. So I figured that it was really not necessarily the sphingomyelinase secreted by the spider's bite. It was not all these other things which we had ruled out. I didn't have cancer. I didn't have anything on top of this. But what I did start to think about was, what is the recipe for bioelectric? What is the recipe for the body electric system that we are all controlled by? The electric aspect of our body is the first thing that happens before chemistry happens. So there's four things in there, and please excuse a couple of the spelling errors. It was a last-minute job. But one is infrared. The other is Schumann waves, minerals, and water. And so I'm going to take each one of those and talk a little bit about it. Well, we all know that infrared is below the visual spectrum of light. I'm also certified in thermography, and infrared becomes a big part of thermographic studies. But this is just kind of a pretty picture of the beach. I was there the other day, and the camera I have has the ability to pick up this glow of some high-intensity infrared. But Schumann waves, and many of you may be familiar with Schumann resonances or Schumann waves, but there's an interesting story that goes along with this. At that same beach was many, many years ago, back around the time of my spider bite, I had a patient of mine who came to see me in San Diego from the East Coast, and she said, I want to see the beach. And I said, well, it's wintertime and it's pouring down rain. She said, it's snowing. There's 12 feet of snow at home for me, so rain and the beach is what I want to do. So I said, let's go to the beach. So we went to the beach, and we're walking along the beach, and I grew up on an island on the East Coast, and I've sailed many parts of the world, and I've heard the ocean in hurricanes, and I've heard the ocean in all different sorts of things. But there was a sound that was taking place that day at the beach that I'd never heard before. And hopefully I can get this guy to turn on. And so you can hear the ocean, but in the background of the ocean there's a So my first thing was to look out at the ocean and see what's going on here. I hear a boat. She said, I hear a boat too, but there was no boat. So I used to have a radio show called The Health Detective, and I called the studio, and I said, come on down here and bring a ladder and bring your best microphones. They said, it's pouring down rain. I said, yeah, I know, I'm at the beach. And he came down, and he recorded this sound, and we took it back to the sound lab, and we listened to it, and we couldn't figure out a lot about it, so he hired a forensic expert. And the forensic expert took it into the lab, and he said, well, you know, I've played around with your sound, And he said, there's not much that I can tell you about the sound, except for the fact that it is the square of the frequency of the Earth. The frequency of the Earth is what is a Schumann wave. And a Schumann wave is a set of spectrum peaks in the extremely low frequency range and portions of the Earth's electromagnetic field spectrum. And that these things are driven by lightning. In other words, all of that Schumann wave stuff is actually driven by electrical storms all over the body. Well, the one thing that controls and runs our body electric is generated by our own planet, basically, between the ionosphere and the Earth's crust. We generate this 7+ hertz frequency. So this became very interesting to me, and I'll go back to that lightning picture before I finish, but I want to tell you a little bit more about what may disrupt Schumann waves. You may be familiar with what are called coronal mass ejections. They're inappropriately called sunspots. They're not really sunspots. I'm on a link to NASA, and NASA sends me warnings of the upcoming CMEs that occur. And I have a lot of autistic kids in my practice. I have a lot of Lyme disease cases in my practice. I have a lot of severely ill people, ALS, Parkinson's, so forth and so on. And every single last one of these cases gets worse when there's a CME. Now, why is that? It's because it only takes about 24 hours for this big electrical storm, this big radiation field, to show up from the sun, and it totally disrupts satellite communication, cell phones. You ever get a cell phone, a text message that was sent a week ago, or an email that was sent a week ago, shows up on your phone, you don't know where in the world it came from? It's because of the CMEs. So when I get notified from NASA, I send a message out to all my chronically ill patients, and I said, don't change your meds, don't do this, don't do that, it's nothing you've done, you're all going to have some sort of an effect of this thing. And all these mothers of autistic kids said, boy, am I glad you told us that, because they were just going off the wall when we were doing this with the CMEs. So also, I take care of the head of the emergency department at Scripps, and he said, you know, they've done studies to say that the moon has really no effect, but they've never been in an emergency room on the full moon. And he said, there is an effect. So the next element that I was looking at was water. It's another critical element of how to create body electric. And this was again by Georgi, which I just find incredible, that here's this guy who got the Nobel Prize for vitamin C, and he's saying things like, life is water dancing to the tune of micromolecules. And in fact, water, everyone thinks of water as having three states: a gaseous state, a solid state, and a liquid state. There's another state to water. It's a liquid crystal state. And you're going to be hearing more and more about that. And if you want to Google someone by the name of Gerald Pollack, P-O-L-L-A-C-K, Gerald Pollack, and he gave a presentation, a faculty member at University of Washington State, and he gave a lecture on water, and a great deal of what I'm talking about here is about that. Well, so we know that water is alive. The other aspect of water that we know is that water mediates low-frequency electromagnetic emission. So Luc Montagnier, who is the fellow who got the Nobel Prize for finding the AIDS virus, has been doing research, and he was, I don't think ousted is the appropriate term, but he has left France, and he's now in China. And one of the things that stimulated that was he started to look at the carrying capacity of water to actually carry with it bacteria, viruses, and other things, and could actually detect the frequency range of these things. And they also did work with blocking the Schumann waves and seeing what happened to the activity of the water when they were blocked. And it does change it. You can go on to, you can do a search on him, and there's a wonderful, expose of this work that he's done, where he took mycoplasma and he filtered out all the mycoplasma from the fluid, and then he took the fluid and showed it to other water, and was able to culture mycoplasma out of the water that it was hanging out with. So when you tell your teenage kids to not hang out with this guy or that girl or this other person, the situation is that we pick up information from each other, and it's our water in our body, of which we're about 83%, that's doing much of that. So also too, here I am lying on the floor, running through my mind of all this stuff on the electronics because I'm paralyzed. I have no bowel control, no urinary control, and I'm saying, so how can I fix this? What's going on with it? So I started taking more of a look at the structure of water. And the first structure of water that's very interesting is surface water is really called an exclusion zone. And the exclusion zone of water carries with it a negative polarity. The bulk water carries with it a positive polarity. So if you want to take a look over to the side, what had happened to me was that my exclusion zone and my bulk water got confused. Yes, I was bitten by a spider. Or if I'd had a bacteria, yes, I had a bacterial problem. But what was the larger causative effect was that my electronics would not stabilize to allow me to stand up. So, have you ever heard about someone that was diving too high and they hit the water and broke their neck? They didn't hit anything under the pool, they hit the water. Because the surface tension of the water was so strong that it was like running into a rock wall. And it's because, if you can see in the bottom of that, you can see the positives and the negatives of the surface tension caused because of the exclusion zone versus the other. So this is a photograph that I was very lucky to do myself in the office with the aid of my staff, but that's the exclusion zone. And how we achieved that was we achieved that with various levels of concentration of minerals that actually drove that apart. Now, if we could take a probe and stick it in the exclusion zone and stick the other part in the bulk water, we could light a light bulb. In other words, our body is generating an electrical force based upon this, and it does it on a cellular level, it does it on a water level, it does it on every level you can imagine. So that exclusion zone is so strong that we said, well, let's see if we can float a paperclip on it. Everybody see the paperclip floating on the water? There wasn't any trickery here. The paperclip was floating on the water. The next item is we took a coin and we put a piece of paper under it with lines on it so you can see how the exclusion zone was actually distorted and bent. It was bent because it was thick. We put the coin on it. The coin stayed there because of the tension, the surface tension of the water. And you can see how it distorted that and even looks like it was below the surface of the water when it was, but it was still in that exclusion zone of the water. Why doesn't the water in Jell-O fall out? Have you ever thought about that? You pick up a mouthful of a spoon of Jell-O and it all stays together. It's because of the organization of the water and the ability to bind to the proteins. That's exactly what's happening in our body. Is electrically we're keeping it all in our body because of our protein's ability to combine it. If you take two beakers of water and you put a charge in each one and you start turning the charge up, they will climb up the beakers and create a bridge between the two of them because of the exclusion zone of the water. That's how hard it is. That's how it works. So minerals are the spark plug of the body's electrical system. Now we think of minerals, but we never think of them as being the spark plug of the body. Electrolytes are both the switch and the battery. Every single last one of us, we're really an organic battery. That's where our energy comes from. So here I am lying on the floor, no bowel control, no urinary control, and I'm lying there figuring out, my wife thought I was totally mad, but I'm lying on the floor figuring out that my battery is somehow or another screwed up. Yes, I was bitten 7 times by a brown recluse spider, and I'd had every reason why I should not be thinking about this sort of stuff, but nobody else had a solution for me. So here was the thing, is the exclusion zone and my bulk water had been confused. My electrical charge got messed up. it was up to me to find out, number one, what kind of minerals are needed to bring me back, what kind of water might bring me back, how about infrared radiation, how about the Schumann resonances, all of those things being important. My light bulb was no longer lit between that area of my body. That's where my paralysis was. And I was unable to get up, as I say. Now, my theory is this. My theory is disease may in fact be an abnormal expression of our biological organization, the collectivity of our cellular mass in disarray. With our biological defense down, we are left to fight pathological organisms on a cellular battlefield. And that, in my opinion, is what's happening with chronic illness today. Is that how many people come to you because they're out of energy? How many people come to you because they can't hold a thought in their brain anymore? How many people come to you with disabling diseases when in the face of all known medicine they've fought this bacteria and that bacteria? Only a very small percentage of bacteria today they can even culture. It was, 15, 20 years ago, you can go to the doctor and they would do a swab or a sample of this and they would culture your blood. They don't culture much anymore because the things have changed. They've morphed. They don't have the same names anymore because they're not the same bugs. One of the reasons for that is the contamination of our food, our water, our feed animals, and everything else with antibiotics. And antibiotics, one of the bad things about antibiotics is, the antibiotics is they create resistance. And when they create resistance, all the bugs change. Just slightly they change. So they're no longer the same bugs. So one bug can easily become another bug. Now, according to medicine, that can't happen. But we have a bunch of people here that says it does. And they're all Nobel Prize winners. They're smarter than I am. I'm just a peon with this. But I've lived the experience of it. So what I was looking at, and what I look in my patients now, is I look at what is their electrical system doing first? Not last, but first. How can I affect their electrical system? Well, I can't. There are devices to create Schumann waves. There are infrared devices. There's some water claiming to be better than other water. But one of the big items to where you can really jump off and get on with is really minerals, because minerals do so many things. They're cofactors, they're electrolytes, they're nutrients, they affect our pH, they affect every organ in our body, and they affect every enzyme in our body. So metalloenzymes play a critical role in enzyme activation. Zinc requires over 200 enzymes. Iron required in over 78 different enzymes. This is zinc right in here. This is the metalloenzyme. If you can see my cursor up there, that's a metalloenzyme, and that's zinc. This is all. You can't go from one level to another in this pathway without having the activating mineral. So what we can control is we can control minerals. Cofactors. Cofactors are connectors for metabolic chemical reactions. Cofactors are non-protein compounds bound to proteins. Cofactors are required for protein biological activity. Two divisions, organic or inorganic, and the inorganic guys are minerals. If you're going to use these cofactors, say for example in getting to PGE1, every one of these things is driven by a different mineral. It happens for proteins. It happens for carbohydrates. It just so happens that these guys are more familiar to people in looking at some of the others. But to get to PGE2, you require zinc, magnesium, calcium, zinc, so forth. Here's more on fat metabolism, all the cofactors that are needed. pH in the body is totally dependent upon minerals. The pH of body fluid is critical for life. Body pH is dependent upon electrolytes. Mineral balance required for body pH, acid pH for mineral absorption in the small intestine. The pH of minerals, these are all the different minerals, and so you can see where the calcium and zinc are very acid, very neutral in theirs, where the iron and manganese is very acid. So electrolytes, autonomic nervous system dysfunction is major. secondary to all the electronic problems with the patients. If you can get their autonomic nervous system balanced, they can finally get a leg up to start getting well. But they will never get well when they're overdriven in sympathetic dominance, which upregulates TH3 and downregulates TH1 and 2. So they have no immune response when their autonomic nervous system is out of balance. Plays a big role in nutrition. Minerals are critical for proper body function. Every organ of the body requires some minerals. Every enzymatic activity is based upon minerals. Now, the mix of minerals is that you could say, oh, I'm low on calcium, or I'm low on this one, or I'm low on another one. The situation is you should search out a naturally complexed mineral, not taking one of these or one of these. The reason for that is every single one of these has an antagonist, has an agonist, and an antagonist. So what we're seeing here is every one of these guys has a synergist and is inhibited by another guy. So when you take a mineral, you want to take one that was created naturally, not one that was created in a laboratory. You want to take one that comes possibly from an old lake source that was left behind as the waters withdrew to the oceans, because the oceans become contaminated, where these other sources, many of them have not, because they existed before the contamination that is involved in the ocean. So what I do with my patients is so many of them have electrical issues that what I did was I said, here's a little simple box of minerals. And what I'd like for you to do is every day I'd like you to take droppers of this mineral. And when you're done with that bottle, go on to the next bottle. This little box will last 25 days. It's an inexpensive little device to get their electric back, to get their body functioning coming back. John said he'd known me for 15 years. How I got to know John is I'm lying on the floor in kind of a mess, as you could imagine, and I'm figuring out that my electric isn't working, and I figured out minerals. I need minerals. So I made some phone calls and I came up with Bionativus. Man never met me before. I told him my story, and he said, well, I'm going to overnight my minerals to you, and let's see how you do. Didn't charge me for them, didn't charge me for overnight shipping, sent the minerals to me, and they were one step in my getting well. Because my brain was a little bit messed up from the spider bites, obviously. I don't have total recall of that time. 13 years later, I'm sitting in a hot tub at a conference in Utah and talking to a woman and her daughter. And their husband came up and he said, where are you from and what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm here lecturing, and I'm from San Diego, and I'm from Scripps. He said, oh, I talked to a guy from Scripps. Oh, got to be 15 years ago or so. And he said, I don't think he's alive anymore. He was really in a bad way when I talked to him. And he said he'd been bitten many times by a brown recluse spider. And he said, would you happen to know this guy? I said, oh, yes, I know him, and I really know him quite well. And he said, well, when you go back, would you tell him hello for me? I said, well, actually, he's sitting across from you. And so it turns out that John's minerals became part of my practice today because I said I was going to go back to that lightning storm picture. One of the elements that creates Schumann waves are electrical storms. Where these minerals are harvested is in the northern part of the Great Salt Lake. After the summer storms, and the lake can be hit over 500 times per hour by lightning bolts. So here are the minerals that carry everything that allowed us to see the exclusion zone, that are filled with Schumann waves, and we also are working on a water product for these to be used exclusively in, but they'll work in any water you want to put in. And so I give this to the patient, and they come back in 3 weeks, and their electronics are working. Now also I tell them to, do some things about their Wi-Fi, do some things about their cell phone, make some other changes. I have several offices, and all our offices are painted with Wi-Fi blocking paint. We have Wi-Fi blocking film on the windows. We have special stuff for our cell phones. I have some little things I call biodominoes that I get from a psychiatrist friend of mine in South America. And these little things block Wi-Fi. I have patients that couldn't sleep because of neighboring Wi-Fi and so forth. And yeah, they can go buy the paint for $500 a gallon, or they can get one of these little things for $50 and throw it in their pocket. But there's no metal in it, because many people who are trying to protect themselves from electronics get these little metal medallions. And oftentimes these little medallions actually imprint and then broadcast what they imprinted. And so you have to be very careful with some of these devices. But anyway, you can control minerals. A lot of these other things you can't. These particular minerals bring together three things in that. They bring together the water, they bring together the Schumann waves, and they bring together the minerals. I think infrared, you can go outside and get some. But in any event, thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has. Anybody have any questions? I'm good. I'm lecturing again in 5 minutes across the hall over here, and I welcome any of you to come to that meeting too. Thank you. Okay. So you guys are recording over there too, or not? I mean, at the other.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. You can ask them right when we walk out.
Okay. You want to unplug that for me?
The guys doing the recording are right there when you walk through their left.
Okay.
I don't believe they are, though.
Okay. Yeah, there's really no need to. And I think the only reason I'm doing this lecture again is because of the fact that there was classes that were, testing that was taking place earlier. Hey, John.
Can I carry some of these things for you?
Well, you know, why don't you do this?
Yeah, you're on laptop. You're on laptop?
Yeah.
I'm kind of hoping everybody does. They haven't updated these.
Oh, really?
It's on 2003 PowerPoint on.
Are you serious?
Yeah.